Hello, and welcome to the Damiano Demon reading session. And I am the author, and I am honored and happy to read this book to you. The Damiano Demon by Thomas Venditti. Introduction. This has been the most difficult book I have written to date. The subject matter contained within these short pages is a very difficult and tragic discussion. The information I am going to present has cost me dearly. I have lost friendships with a considerable number of people over this. It's actually heartbreaking for me to see so many people abandon me for pursuing the investigation that follows. There were many times when I thought it was not the right thing to do, so I would leave it alone for months. Ultimately, my conscience compelled me to put my research into words that people can read and discern for themselves. Michael Colossi, Rape of the Soul DVD, deserves the initial credit for breaking this story in 2006. He was awoken 3 times in successive nights and was led to an amazing journey of discovery and exposing a grave evil that has entered the church through sacred art. 10 years later, never having heard of Michael Colossi, I was shown the same thing after praying in a chapel dedicated to the Blessed Mother. I would encourage everyone reading this book to let go of any preconceived ideas about Francis of Assisi and to look to the facts. I am a practicing Catholic and have no interest in discouraging anyone from joining the Church or encouraging anyone to leave the Church. My goal is to see the Church cleanse itself of the evil images that have been allowed to find a home in Catholic churches around the world. It is my wish that a revolution of truth begin in the Church. I would like to name the revolution Cleansing the Catholic Temple. And I would like to dedicate this mission to the Immaculate Conception. I would hope that the Pope, bishops, priests, and lay people together lead this revolution and once again take pride in God's house, making it a home for beautiful and reverent art. It is my prayer that my university, Franciscan University of Steubenville, set an example for the rest of the world and publicly apologizes for spreading this devotion to so many trusting young people over the years. I would also hope that EWTN would stop selling and promoting the cross as well. I have tried to be as concise and clear as possible, blaming the devil himself for the damage caused by the Damiano demon. Father Michael Scanlon, TOR, has blessed my efforts to bring the truth to light, and he has acknowledged being responsible for placing this image in prominent places throughout the university. His humility and openness to the possibility that a cross he has always loved and promoted contains a pagan phallic symbol was the incentive I needed to make this work public for all concerned to discern. St. Francis of Assisi is one of the most widely known and respected saints ever in the history of the Church. The current Pope Francis has taken the name Francis to honor this great Christian. His popularity has even spread across religions, and he is respected by many people who are advocates for peace, animals, the environment, and the poor. Within the Catholic, Lutheran, and Anglican churches, there are communities named after Francis of Assisi, such as the Secular Franciscans, the Order of Regular of Franciscans, the Third Order Regular of Franciscans, the Order of Friars Minor, OFM, the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal, FFR, just to name a few. Francis lived from 1182 to 1226 AD and was from Assisi, Italy. There are both men and women living in communities named after Francis of Assisi. He was canonized as saint by the Catholic Church in 1228 AD, just 2 years after his death. There are many biographies and stories written about the life of St. Francis, which can easily be found since they are so abundant. The books tend to vary in regards to the details of Francis' life. Some books tend to focus on the supernatural powers and events that seem to be present during Francis' earthly life. Others are more focused on the factual historical events in the life of Francis. Clearly, there are many variations of these stories that exist, and how much fact and fantasy are present depends on the author. This book wants to focus on one particular story that has a great significance on the church today. This story is about the encounter Francis had with the cross-like icon he found in the ruins of the church of San Damiano near Assisi, Italy. St. Francis of Assisi had been an inspiration to me because he was not a lifelong saint. He struggled for many years with spirituality and religion as I did. He searched and made mistakes as I did. He had an amazing conversion to Jesus Christ, which, which changed his life forever, as I did. He was tempted by the devil, as I am. He loved the Blessed Mother, as I do. So I have a lot in common with Francis. I am hopeful to become a saint as Francis did, but I have a long way to go. I have a tremendous respect for this amazing saint, and I'm not scandalized by the mistakes he made in the early years of his life. Francis went to war in 1205 AD to fight as a soldier for Assisi. On his way to battle, Francis had a vision that instructed him to return to Assisi and not to fight. He had fought in other battles and was no stranger to fighting. His return was a scandal to his family, as he was looked upon as a deserter and embarrassment. He had fought in previous battles and was even a POW for a time. His family was very prominent in Assisi, and news spread quickly about his return. Francis spent this time after his return to Assisi searching and wandering the countryside, trying to make sense of his life. He was clearly disillusioned with the fighting, the materialism, the wealthy church, and was instead seeking a deeper meaning for his existence. All the historians agree that during this time he came upon an abandoned church in Assisi known as the church at San Damiano. The extent to which the church building was in disrepair seems to vary, but everyone agrees the church was not open for Mass, and the building was in bad shape when Francis stumbled upon it. Apparently, Francis enjoyed hanging out in this ruined, abandoned church where he frequented it often. It was here that he found an icon that had been left in the remains of the church. I have read that the icon was still hanging in the building, and I have read that it had been buried by debris and grass. Whatever the situation, Francis took a liking to this icon and hung it up above the old altar. This became the favorite place for Francis to pray and converse with Jesus. I have included a picture of this icon for everyone to observe closely. This is probably the most famous icon cross in the Catholic Church today, prominently displayed in many Franciscan institutions, monasteries, and churches throughout the world. This cross is for sale in just about every Catholic bookstore and gift shop in the world. The original icon was at least 6 foot tall. All the popes have prayed before this cross and have spoken so highly of its significance. All the modern popes. The devotion shown to this cross is almost unprecedented in the history of the Church. I cannot think of another cross that has ever achieved the popularity and affection of more Catholics than this particular cross. There is clearly something magical about this image. It is mesmerizing to the audience, to say the least. This close-up picture of the San Damiano cross is found in Steubenville, Ohio at the Franciscan University of Steubenville. Franciscan University of Steubenville is the school that I attended and received my bachelor's degree in theology in 1985. The cross is present in practically every classroom on campus, in every office building on campus, and in every chapel, dining hall, and gymnasium. Needless to say, this cross is revered by many Catholics and considered to be sacred and holy. According to tradition, it was from this cross that Jesus spoke to Francis of Assisi. Francis, Francis, go and repair my house, which, as you can see, is falling into ruin. The tradition has it that Jesus literally began speaking to Francis through this particular icon. I personally do not believe anyone should doubt whether or not Francis heard a voice, whether audibly or interiorly. Something significant happened to Francis in connection to this cross. Clearly, Francis responded to this instruction quickly and specifically. The church at San Damiano was deteriorating, which has been historically confirmed, and Francis confirmed that he heard his name being spoken. So Francis followed the instructions and began to gather tools and supplies to literally rebuild the ruined church at San Damiano. As far as we know, Francis did not check with anyone, a priest, bishop, or spiritual advisor. He simply took it upon himself to begin the restoration project. I guess an abandoned church building was an opportunity for Francis to do something with his life. The events that were to follow are extremely important to consider and analyze. Most historians agree on the general series of events that followed this encounter that Francis had with the San Damiano cross. The events that followed Francis' encounter with the icon cross are pretty universally agreed upon. I want to just lay out the basics of the story most commonly agreed upon by all interested parties. These agreed upon events contain an untold story that most believers have missed. It is so clear that it's hard to believe that so many people have missed these obvious details. I would add that the San Damiano cross was hidden for 700 years from public after the death of Francis. This fact alone could possibly excuse many saints from knowing what we know today. Let's begin to unfold the story. Everyone agrees that Francis deserted the army and returned home to Assisi. Clearly, Francis was confused and searching. It was quite unusual that someone of Francis' stature would abandon his companions on the battlefield. Some stories indicate Francis was arrested as a deserter and spent time in jail because of it. Francis claimed to have been instructed to return to Assisi by a dream. When he returned home, he brought shame to his family and was considered to be troubled, even sick. He was clearly a lost soul seeking direction in his life. He was not a saint at this point in his life. The things he did and said were coming from a lost soul seeking direction. I am sure God was trying to reach him as well as perhaps the devil. Francis' soul was clearly up for grabs. Everyone agrees that Francis found the cross amongst the ruins at San Damiano, and that Francis was attracted to it. He most likely cleaned it up and placed it in a place where he could observe it and meditate on it. He clearly received some consolation from this cross. Why this cross was left behind in a ruined church is an unanswered question that one could only speculate upon. Did the Catholic Church reject this cross when they closed the church at San Damiano? Most likely anything of value would have been retrieved, and certainly anything considered sacred would have been gathered up by church officials. This tells us two things. The cross was buried and not discovered by church officials responsible for gathering of the sacred objects. Or the cross was intentionally left behind because it was considered worthless or disrespectful in some way. It would be helpful to know why this church building fell into ruin. Was there some type of cult activity taking place in the church associated with the cross, and the church decided to close it down? The bottom line is that the cross that spoke to Francis was disregarded originally and was probably considered unimportant or undesirable by the Catholic Church at the time of Francis. Everyone agrees that Francis had an encounter of a spiritual nature that was connected to this cross. The church has never declared the encounter to be miraculous, as they have with other apparitions, Lourdes, Fatima, etc. This is simply a tradition that most people have never questioned or thought much about. I personally do believe that something spiritual took place. After his encounter, all of a sudden Francis had a direction, goal, mission to follow. He was now committed to rebuilding the San Damiano church. Francis, a lost soul, an army deserter, now had a purpose, and he began immediately with his mission. Without any permission, Francis began selling his father's possessions to raise money for the building project. This was considered to be theft by his father, who disapproved of this building project. If Francis was going to rebuild the church building, he couldn't do it by taking what didn't belong to him. Everyone also agrees that the tension between father and son grew worse. It is known that Francis' father actually reported these crimes to the Bishop of Assisi, who called for a hearing. The The bishop sided with the father on this, despite Francis' efforts to rebuild a Catholic church. Francis was told to stop, repay his father for the theft, apparently in the company of many witnesses, including his mother and father and the bishop. So Francis, stripped entirely naked, returned his clothing to his father. He renounced his earthly family and informed all present that God was his father. The bishop ordered Francis to be clothed at this point with one of his own garments. This event has been identified as a turning point in Francis' life. As a father of 5 children, I would not have been proud of my son if this had happened to me. Francis' father has been made out to be the bad guy in this story, when in actuality, the bishop said he was correct and in the right. Many, on the other hand, praise Francis for the rejection of his father in public nudity, as put forth in the famous movie Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon. Instead of saying to his parents, "I'm sorry," he publicly humiliated them. Yet he's praised by many for this renunciation. To be continued. Thank you.